I think at the moment we've got something which is a bit different in a few different respects. Like one, you've already mentioned, like that people are walking around with, well, a lot of people are walking around with smartphones,
Yeah.
or they've got access to various social media in other ways. That means that these comments, these images being shared are actually penetrating into their lives right when they're at home. There's nowhere really where people can get that complete safety or that separation. Whereas, and we might be of a similar generation, if something was going bad at school for me, I knew that I could go home, maybe I
Yeah.
had a neighbor, I
Yeah.
was friends with my brother, whatever else. So that's one thing. And I think also it's important to remember this is coming off the back of both the pandemic, when young people were very isolated. Um, there's a lot of mental health issues brewing there. They missed a big chunk of their education, especially in terms of their relationships and those social skills. And we're still dealing with the aftermath of that. And finally, and I think quite positively, we're currently at this point where we're having those brave conversations about what is actually going on for young people here. So it, it might also, what I'm trying to say here is that it's fantastic that we've got this report coming out, which is actually saying these are problems which might have been ignored 10 years ago as well. A, because they weren't so visible, but
Mm.
B, because we weren't brave enough to actually talk about it and address it.
The report recommends compulsory sex education. So what is it that you would want to say to, well, that you do say perhaps to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys at school about the way in which they speak about or think about or interact with their classmates?
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Actually, I'd probably start the conversation from the opposite direction. And I think we'd be saying, with curiosity, well, what are the messages that you're already hearing? Because this is really where we're trying to do the work. Because a big part of the issue that's going on is that they've got so many of these influences in the back of their heads already or from each other. And we need to unpack that first and then show the consequence of it. And then really make sure that whatever's happening, there's that underlying core
Yeah.
of respect for another person and a real understanding of the consequence of their
They
actions.
then are the vehicle that is used for other views about women and girls that they are subjected to through particular the internet. It's not coming from them. They're not born inherently misogynist or looking to sexually harass teenage girls. It's that they are the vehicle for those attitudes.
Yeah, thankfully not. Thankfully, they're not
Yeah,
born
yeah.
that way. This is about influence, and it is about influence from peers, influence from social media and media. And so we can address that. That's a really powerful thing about that observation. We can make changes by addressing actually how do they interpret those messages, what do they value, and how do they understand other people's experiences of that. So if you start from the curiosity, you move through and do a piece where there's actually an empathetic conversation. And if all of that's been couched in a broader conversation about their experiences, recognizing their own insecurities, um, how they are thinking about, well, how am I going to be flirting with people in the future, or what am I interested in, and how are people going to judge me for that? Those can be confusing conversations for people. So give them that space, encourage that empathy with their peers, with the girls around them, with women more broadly, and actually encourage them beyond just don't be the problem. So like, okay, how can you be the solution here? What can you be doing for your peers, for the rest of society to change this problem?
You sound way more patient than I would be, Daniel, because I think as I say, I mentioned my daughter earlier. I just think if this was happening at my daughter's school to my daughter or about my daughter, I wouldn't be looking for anyone to approach these boys with a degree of empathy. I'd be looking to approach them with something to beat them with.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's completely legitimate, I believe, that reaction. And it's why it's so important that somebody is doing this job. Because otherwise, to be frank, it tends to be left to the girls themselves to
Yeah,
educate the
yeah.
boys, call them out, or mainly to female members of staff, to women who are teachers, who themselves are, as the report also identified, who themselves are experiencing harassment or misogyny, often, or at least occasionally. So it's got to be that we've got a group that come in and do this work. And I think one of the important things to identify here is that at the moment, the report's identifying, let's invest in training for teachers. And I think particularly on a day when teachers are on strike, we need to also have that conversation of, well, can we just lump teachers with yet another job?
Yeah.
Do they need more resourcing as well as training? Should there be a role here for experts who actually can do different pieces of work and have different training from what the teachers do themselves.
Good to speak to you.
For me, that's really where we've got to be continuing the conversation.
Very good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Daniel Guinness, co-founder, managing director of Beyond Equality, who gave evidence to this inquiry. One of the outcomes of this inquiry is that sex and relationship education, about which the government is having a review anyway, but that RSE should be compulsory in sixth forms and colleges.